Thank you very much indeed, and it's thank you for asking me along today. So, for those who know nothing about me, let me just start by saying I've work around the planning agenda. I'm a professor of planning at Plymouth University. I have developed government policy for more than a decade in various areas, but always about creating more sustainable communities. And sustainable means not just environmentally sustainable, but also economically and socially sustainable. And I always say that what I work on is not building houses, it's building communities, building places, and helping, whether it's national government, Homes England, or local councils, think through the things that they need to consider to achieve a really successful piece of placemaking, whatever choices they may come to about location, edge of community, new community, or and indeed, I also work on some urban regeneration schemes. To me, the most important thing is creating a vibrant, successful place. And my heart always sinks when people talk about the need to build more houses. To me, it's a need to build communities that I'm always focused on. If we go back more than a decade now, I was asked to do a piece of work. I'd been a member of parliament for more than 20 years, representing a rural community down in Cornwall, a place that I'd grown up, a place of market towns, not large cities. Actually, you don't go far before you hit the next town or village. It's the nature of the way that Cornwall works, but also a very poor community. And the then government asked me to do a piece of work on reviewing the rural economy. I said you can't look at the rural economy without looking at housing, and that I wanted particularly to focus on planning. And I published a report for government, it was a government report, called Living, Working Countryside, which developed the themes I've just been talking about, and was taken up by the then government, but also taken up by the Conservative Party outside government, and informed a lot of the reforms made by the coalition, though not all and not everything I've argued for has ever been adopted. I only wish it would. And the kind of things that meant was neighbourhood planning, so enabling smaller communities to take decisions about how they would grow at a parish level generally. Changing the idea of sustainability, so it wasn't just environmental, it was about this broad way of creating places that were environmentally sustainable but also needed to be economically and socially sustainable, and that change was happening because people are living much longer than they were. The number over 65s will double over the next 40 years, and the number of over 80s is doubling over just 20 years. So and as people increasingly in old age live in their own homes, they're not freeing up homes for a younger generation, but in the 90s and into the 2000s, we hit the second great baby boom, following that after the Second World War. So we've got a generation of young people growing up who will need homes, and a generation of older people who, God willing, have been living much longer, and hopefully as we see the vaccinations roll out, that will continue to be the case, and being able to live in their own homes because we're all healthier and fitter longer. These are good things, but it's created the need for housing. And as I did that work on it, I became increasingly concerned that one of the big reasons that we weren't delivering enough homes is we'd limited ourselves to two things. One was urban renewal, brownfield sites, making sure that we made the best use of the existing communities and renewed them. And that was important, but it wasn't going to deliver enough homes, partly because a lot of it had already been done. But it had led to the renewal of places that when I was growing up were very run down in London that are now unbelievably unaffordable. It had led to the renewal of places like Liverpool, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds that were very different from when I grew up in the 70s and 80s and were run down and populations emptying. But much of that had been already done. And secondly, we were then, to meet the remaining need, just adding estates of houses around the edge of every town and village. Estates without facilities, estates that didn't answer the question of how would you get into the doctor's surgery, how would you get across town with the children to the school, how would you access shops. They never had a corner shop, they never had a pub. And because of the competition for limited land, the land prices were going up, the houses were getting ever more expensive, but the quality was going down and down. And you were getting these bland estates all over the country that were anything but environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable, or economically sustainable, and were ruining historic places. Now, that's not to say that you can never build on the edge of a community, but I was arguing that needs to be done better. But it seemed to me obvious that we needed to also return to the thought of creating new places. That was envisaged when the Planning Acts were brought in the 1940s. There were three legs to development: urban renewal, planned extension of place, not estate by estate housing on appeal, but planned growth of places that included all of the things I'm talking about. And it was done through the local plan, not on appeal, not by little applications for 200 houses at a time, as if it's the last application, and then another 200, and then another 200. But they knew when they introduced those planning rules that people didn't want to ruin their towns and villages, and that therefore the only way to deliver the extra homes needed, and particularly to deliver better quality lifestyles for people who, after all, are not just living in bombed out centres, but urban slum, high density urban slums with no access to countryside, no gardens, living in multiple occupation. So if we were going to provide houses after First World War termed homes fit for heroes, we needed to create new places too. Originally, those ideas were developed by people like Ebenezer Howard with the Garden Cities movement, which was not actually about cities, but what we today think of as villages. And then later, in a different way through central government, the new towns, which were done on a much bigger scale in the post-war period, some successfully, some much less successfully. But by the late 80s, we'd actually delivered the homes people needed. The population was dropping, and we stopped the New Towns programme because it wasn't needed. Actually, the issues were urban regeneration in these rundown big cities. But since then, as I say, people are living longer, the population's boomed, and we need to deliver the homes. And I was worried that we were simply ruining the kind of places that I grew up in. And therefore, we needed to go back to that original idea of adding in the option of new places. And I want to just bring up two maps to just illustrate this. They're notional. If we go to the next slide, hopefully, there we are. This is an imaginary market town, but you see around that town there are some darkish green blobs. Those are the places you can't build. Maybe it's a site of special scientific interest, a nature reserve, an historic woodland. The greyed out to the right is a protected landscape, AONB, or national park, and on the other side is undesignated countryside. So, and you can see I've placed some villages in both around the market town. And what happened, of course, is because we're doing this estate by estate development, we've ruled out the possibility of going anywhere else. There may be the market town it's not full of brownfield sites. It's not full of places you want to demolish and put high rise. It would be entirely inappropriate. I've seen some market towns that are putting in high rise, and it makes my eyes water. I hope we can do better than that. But primarily, what's happened is, as we've needed those homes for the next generation, everything that's not protected becomes open season for developers. They acquire the interest in the land, they take options on it, they promise the landowners a fortune, and the landowners won't allow development unless they can make multi-million pounds as a result. And what happens is you get estate by estate development, and the land value is so high because everyone knows that that red zone is going to be developed sooner or later, and they'll only release it when they can make enough money from it. The houses you get on it are increasingly small. We're building smaller homes than we were in the 1920s. The homes on it are increasingly poor quality, and I'm afraid too many of you, if you've bought new homes, will have had the experience of the quality, but you certainly will see it. And of course, where it's placed is the very fields people would want to take their dog for a walk, the places that absolutely affect the views and the setting of the town. And yet that's the only place we're allowing. These are green fields, But now we're only building on the ones with most value, both financially, so they cost the most to build on, but also for many people, they are the most important piece of countryside. They are the setting of their historic town, and what they get on it is the very development that they least want, these very poor quality estates with no facilities. And therefore, to get to facilities, you have to drive across the market town to the school on the other side that has some free places. You drive into the shopping area. The buses don't pass through the estates, so you jump in your car. There's no pub on the corner, no fish and chip shop, no general store. So we increasingly find the streets stuck with traffic jams, the fumes rising, and frankly the fuming rising, because people don't like what they see and then they oppose the next estate. And as it gets more and more unpopular, we do less and less. So my proposal was to allow, not insist on, these choices of the council, and the council, because it represents the community, and through the local plan process to engage the community in the choice. But that's one choice you see in front of you. But I wanted to allow this other choice. So if we go to the next slide, and I'm not, remember, these are just indicative. They just give a sense of what's going on. This is a similar quantum of development, but now not on the edge of the market town. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you never build on the edge. This is just yin and yang. This is to show you a different way of doing it. You'll see one of these on, two of these are placed next to a railway station, so to provide easy non-car access into the market town. Another on the main road into the town to make it easy to provide a bus service, and that's an extension of an existing village. Others, what people would say, well, they're in the middle of the countryside. Well, yes, but then so is every other village and every other market town. It's just they were developed a long time ago, but they're all connected to easily to either the rail route or the road. But these ones are shown connecting into the railway hall. So a quick ride to a quick journey, hopefully in a hopper bus to a station that can get you into town if that's where your work is. And you'll notice how much of this map is green. And people often say to me, you can't build homes. We need to go high rise because we're so short of countryside. And if I ask people about what they think the development is in the southeast, outside London, they'll say, well, at least half the southeast is already developed. And I say, well, if I put every park, garden, road, rail, business, home, shop, all together, say all of that as development, even the parks and the gardens will take as developed area. The actual figure for the southeast outside London, this is the most developed part of England, is just 12%, 12.2% of the southeast. Everything else is fields, and you can see that. And actually, if you fly into Heathrow or Gatwick, you see it as you pass over it, field after field after field. And then just to give a sense of that, nobody's suggesting you build all 3 million homes of the government's 10-year target in the southeast. It will be across the whole of the country. But if you did, I asked people how much it would add to the 12.2%. And people will say another 10, 20% will be concreting over. Actually, at densities that were being built when I did my original review, you would build 3 million homes in the southeast and take less than 1% of that remaining 88% of green fields. So you'd go from 12.2 to actually 13% developed area. So it's not that there's a shortage of land. So all I'm saying is there's a choice. There's a choice about where you put them, but there's something else really important about these blobs that are red, and that is that nobody has optioned up the land. If the farmer sold that farm today, it would be sold at agricultural value of not £1 million an acre for permitted land, perhaps, but £10,000 or £20,000 agricultural value. And the difference in that price, and you won't get it all because, of course, the farmer won't sell for just for nothing if he doesn't want to move. But key with these new settlements is there's the opportunity to say, we will only allow development here. We don't have to. It's not on the edge of town. It's a choice that we're making. And we will let you build homes there, but we will only let you build homes if you also build schools and shops and doctors' surgeries and pubs and public transport infrastructure and green routes for bicycles, and that everything's in walking distance, what we call the 5-minute walking distance to at least a local parade of shops and the local primary school, the 15-minute city where you can easily travel, not by car, but by active travel, whether it's bike, walk, electric cycles, e-scooters, or indeed buses and so on, to get to everything that you want to in easy, ready distance. And how can you afford that? You can afford it because you're doing it this way. And now the market town isn't getting lots more traffic in the streets. The schools aren't filled. We don't have to ask how the doctors will cope because we are creating all this new. And the irony, of course, is this shouldn't be extraordinary. This shouldn't be thought to be impossible because this is what market towns are. This is what large communities already do. This is what neighbourhoods do. It was actually what Ebenezer Howard planned. And it happened in the new towns too, where every neighbourhood had a parade of shops, a church in those days, a community hall, a doctor's surgery. That's how they were planned out. And of course, in those days, they thought about the car more than we would. And in those days, after the war, they were short of materials, so they built short life homes. And we know some of the problems with that. And we don't need to do that today either. But let me show you just what a community looks like, because I wanted to show people what an existing small market town looks like. And this is a town of only 2,000. I think in this case, you're looking around the 5,000 homes. This is a community of 2,000. So if we go to the next slide, we'll go to an actual town. This is Eynsham in Oxfordshire. Any of you who know it, it's between Witney and Oxford. And although we often think of Oxfordshire countryside as beautiful cottages and little villages, Eynsham is exactly the same as any small market town or large village really in England. It's very typical. It looks like it, it works like it. And what you find is that, yes, some people will go into Witney or Oxford for a job. There'll be lecturers who occasionally lecture at the university, but actually most everyday life takes place within Eynsham. It doesn't put huge amounts on the road because most facilities are there. The school's there, the shops are there, the plumbers are there, the electricians are there, the day-to-day life, the leisure facilities are there. And if you look at the number of community clubs, there's over 100. If you look at the number of businesses, there's over 250 enterprises within that community. Roughly speaking, there's a job for everybody who lives there. They won't all work there. There will be some people come in and some people go out. But this is a thriving, self-sustaining community. And if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to pass through these quickly. This gives you a map of the community facilities. And that is your 5 and 15-minute walk ring. And it's less than that. It's 400 meters and 800 meters. So you can see with the blue shading shows shops that you can see how the facilities are within the core. There are parks, there's playing fields, there's allotments, everything within walking or easy cycling distance. Not at all unusual. If we go to the next slide, we can look specifically at the enterprises. And again, you see that core. The red ones are essentially the retail. Look just how much there is. It's a huge amount. This is only 2,000 homes. I live in a village of 1,000. And it's one of the poorest communities in the country. It's in the China Clay area of Cornwall, a mining community. And we have a general store, we have a fish and chips, we have a butcher's still, we actually have a grocer still out of a shed. In a posher place, it would be a farm shop because it does sell local produce. But here it's just cheaper veg than the co-op. We have a burger bar, we have a Chinese takeaway. We have, with the garage closed a few years ago, but we have somebody who does the car repairs. We have builders, plumbers who have sheds and lockups within the village services. And this is just a bigger scale example of the same thing. And around the edge, you see the enterprise units, the places for small businesses to set up or operate. And as I said, there's 250 of these enterprises within the community. And then if we go to the next slide, there's the pictures. As I said, Some bits are nice, some bits are less nice. It's exactly what you'd expect. I could take you to probably 1,000 villages anywhere in the country that would look not very different from this. But I want to draw your attention to something. Many of these units are very small. These are not supermarkets. They're not Costa Coffee. They're actually much nicer than that. They're local entrepreneurs going into little units that have little cost to come in or out. And as soon as they're usually owned by local people, they're effectively little pension funds. And if a business packs up, they'll find somebody else who wants to start a business. And we all know that Costa Coffee is fine, but you find a little coffee shop that makes lovely homemade cakes and a fantastic coffee, and you get to know the owners, there's something really special about that. And I'm told, well, this is all very well, but you can't do this. We can't create new places. And I say, well, Bath was a new place designed from scratch. It didn't just emerge. That's a new town, Bath. Letchworth, Ebenezer Howard's first place, and then Welwyn Garden. These were new places designed. One of the most expensive places in London, Hampstead Garden Suburb, designed on Garden City principles, in that case as an urban extension, but preserving Hampstead Heath, creating one of the biggest amenity assets anywhere in the country for people to use, and driving value. So a place that people really, really want to live. And the best new towns, we barely even think that they are new towns. We've forgotten. It's only the worst of them that we tend to think of. But the driving force in most places is not the house. It's the fantastic little shop you can pop into, the cafe that you can pop into, the restaurant run by a local Italian family, if I can call them a local Italian family. I think you all know what I mean. The fish and chip shop that you can get fish and chips on a Friday evening. All of those things, and they're run by local entrepreneurs. And people say, well, we can't do that today. Typical development does, as I say, it's just housing, but if it has anything, it will have a place for a modern spa shop, which will probably fail because people don't use it. I saw a plan for 2,000 homes. This is 250 enterprises here. I saw a plan for 2,000 new homes as an urban extension, where the consultants had said it would only support one shop. And I said to them, if you only put one shop there, you haven't created a place, you've created a dormitory, and that one shop will fail. Because why would you pop into the one shop? Here you pop into a place that's got a whole variety of things. You can have a coffee as well as do some shopping and pick up the goods that you need. And it can be done. And that's what the Garden Community Programme is about enabling, by land value capture, by planning it in advance. If we go to the next shot, I just want to show you it can be done. So there we are. This is a brand new community that is less than 10 miles away from where I live, and I'm talking to you now in the poorest part of Cornwall. It's Nansledden. It's that's my dog. I hope you can hear me now. So Nansledden is a new community. It will be 4,500 homes. It will have its own high street. And what you see there is the beginnings of that high street, just the very earliest stages, what will become the little shops on the edge of some of the core that will come later. The striking thing about this is you'll see that these shops are occupied. They've now got 2 cafes, not 1. You've got a whole lot of other things. There's actually a wedding shop. There's a solicitor moved into one of them, using it as an office. There's a whole variety of one moment. Can you ask Jacob to set you up for Arthur? Go on. Yeah, quick. And shut the door. And my son has got a piano lesson on an iPad, and he's 8, so that's going to be organised separately. That's working from home. These shops are being occupied, but there are only 250 homes so far built of the 4,500. These shop units went in immediately. The shop units, as you see, look like traditional shops, and they will play just as well as a coffee shop, as a little restaurant, as a solicitor, as a general store, as a butcher, whatever it might be, but they are very cheap to go in. They're below rateable value, so you pay no rates, the rents are low, and they're all fitted out. A Costa would be 4 times the size and might cost £500,000 to fit out for them to move in. Local entrepreneurs can't work like that. And frankly, it would add nothing to the community. So here we have it already going in, and actually there's many more than you see in these pictures. If we go to the next slide. This is Poundbury. Now, Poundbury is now at 1,200 homes. 1,200 homes, still tiny. We tend to think of it as village size, but they've created it as a market town. They have delivered 1 job per unit. The units you see over the shops, although they look very pretty on the outside, they're standard build inside, and those are actually council homes. So they're council flats above the shops. The shops themselves, again, below rateable value, very low rent. This is one of 3 neighbourhood centres in those 1,200 homes. It's the medium-sized one, Bakery Square. I think it's lovely. And almost all the businesses have been set up by local people who live within the community. Nanseddon in Cornwall is a very poor community. This is a little bit wealthier, but not much. Dorchester, we're not talking high end. It may look lovely, but that's because it's been created to look good. And they've actually got a much larger square now because it's got 1,200 homes. So there is a Waitrose, there is bigger facilities there as well. But what they have successfully done is create places. These are not housing estates. And the reason they can do this is they took land that had low value at the start, but they did something else too. And this is where I advise government, but it's also where I advise many, many councils. And actually, I advise the private sector on how to deliver this too. And the bottom line is you don't give permission. You don't give the red line till you put policy in place that requires this to be delivered. So the best thing about this meeting and what you're doing, and I'm going to finish here, is that you're exploring the thought rather than delivering a permission. At the point that you give the permission, the risk is that the land is traded, and suddenly you've got a developer saying, well, I can't afford to do all the nice stuff because I paid too much for the land, all you're going to get is houses. But if you put the policy in place and say, actually, the deal is this, you get no houses unless you deliver the place. And it may be like this, or it may be much more modern. I do designs, which I tend to call living with nature, which are much more 21st century in the way that they look and feel, but they still deliver these little units. I do urban regeneration schemes. I always take people to have a look at Elephant Park in London, but exactly the same thing. They call them affordable retail. Some of it's actually in containers. They put in a container village to allow early retail and food, and that container village will never go because it's so popular. It will just stay like that because it's actually quite funky and different. So it doesn't have to look like this, but it absolutely has to be a 21st century market town built around sustainability, community economy, and not a housing estate. That's the opportunity that I'm passionate about doing, and it's what I help people do. Whatever choices they make, I try to help them deliver it as a community and as a place, and not a housing estate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Taylor. We appreciate obviously the difficulties working from home while simultaneously homeschooling. We've got a couple of questions for you. The first question: we've seen retail businesses in our towns and cities struggling over the last decade or so. Do you think a small garden community village could successfully support new retail businesses? Well,
first of all, I think it's critical they do, and I think I've explained why. Otherwise, you're just building a housing estate. So this has to go in, and actually, I might add that it has to go in from the start. So what Nanseddon are doing, which is putting in these units very early on, creates the circumstance in which people expect to walk out of their door and go to the shops and the cafe. If you just build houses and say, well, there aren't enough early on, we'll do the shops at the end, you'll probably never do the shops, or there'll just be a Costa and a supermarket, because people will have already established patterns of going elsewhere for their day-to-day needs. Of course, people will still go into, as it were, the Oxford or the Whitney. You'll go elsewhere for the cinema, maybe the tertiary education, maybe you don't have a big swimming pool, or whatever it is. There will be all sorts of the big retail, the big box retail, but the fashion retail, you don't expect those to be in these communities. And indeed, this community will support the regeneration of those larger centres. So if you've got run-down local towns, Fleet, for example, people here will go into those places for the largest type of facilities that's already there, and frankly are never going to be delivered in a new community for the reasons that the question raises. But we all need to eat, we all need leisure, we all need cafes, and coronavirus in a way has shown us just how important these neighbourhood facilities are. And if you put them in from the start, not all of it, because 250 homes will only support a limited amount, but if you're putting that in from the start at an appropriate scale, you establish those patterns. Just as you need to have sheds for plumbers and electricians, you need to have great quality workplaces, offices over shops, for example, so that people can, who don't work from home, nevertheless run a business within the community, and you establish it that way. But I'd also say that in this era of the internet and the loss of many of these big retailers, and we've seen Debenham and others, and clearly it's a very, very difficult time on the high street, the places that are thriving are actually these little shops. Truro has got thriving little coffee shops and local entrepreneurs doing things. My own village is not suffering. In fact, coronavirus has encouraged people to use their local facilities, and I hope we won't return to what used to be the case. And I work with larger scale retailers. So, for example, a company called Elandi that owns many of medium-sized little shopping centres. So not the flashy ones, but the place, and they're all town centre. So they're traditional town centre little shopping centres, probably built 30 years ago, typically 40 years ago. And what they're looking to is downsize to these kind of units. They can let little units quite easily, little shops. Much harder to let larger scale ones that might be over 2 stories, because those kind of retail is gone. So actually, go to Brighton, the main high street is struggling, but the lanes in Brighton are thriving. So I think this is the future of retail. It's a future place. It's places that we enjoy and wander and service us from our homes.
Thank you, Lord Taylor. One more question. You mentioned a key element of success is low land values. How would you overcome the fact that most of the land available for Shapley Heath is actually already under option to major developers?
So I work on a lot of these projects. The core is that the deal is simple. So the options, they haven't bought the land outright generally, they've agreed a minimum land value, but actually what they do is they share the higher land values, and they're under an obligation to get as much money as possible for every acre. The key is that the council sets policy that says you need to do these things and you will not get the permission otherwise. And I've worked with other local authorities where the local plan sets out a distinct series of requirements. There will be retail, there will be employment, there will be the parks, or you don't get it at all. Now that is very difficult once you've got in a position where this is already permitted land allocated in the local plan. It's very doable when you're at the stage you're at, where you're saying, well, we're not definitely decided we're going to do this or not. We're not even definitely decided exactly where it will be. If you want this, the price of doing it is doing it right. And they know, for these new settlement sites, that there is, if you decide not to do it, they will never be able to build anything at all. So they have to play ball at this stage. And the key thing is, don't assume that a design code, once you've done the planning permission, will do it, because actually you can wriggle out of a design code very quickly. You can argue on viability. The key is that it's nailed down in this policy in the local plan process early on. So at the point you want to do this, you've already done that. But of course, you work in a partnership with those land promoters early on, because they want to get it over the line. So this is the stage where you've got the leverage. This is the stage where you can work. And I always say, don't worry about being in a partnership. You haven't taken the decision. That's a separate issue. But working up the detail on what it will look like and saying, no, actually, we're not going to let you do that because it's not good enough. At this stage, that's the way that you take this forward. And I chair one down here on the edge of St Austell. Everybody said it will just be a housing estate. We'll never get the road. We'll never get the employment. We'll never get the school. Well, ironically, we've delivered the road. We've actually already delivering the employment, and there's employment in place, new buildings in place. The school foundations are going in now, and we still haven't built a single house. And the first thing that will be developed will be the village square and the retail in the square with the immediate surrounding shops. So it's the exact opposite of what everybody was worried about. But to do that, we formed a strategic partnership, and I chair that board, between the council and the private sector, developer, landowner, and Homes England. And we worked as a team to do that and to hold it to the original vision. And people didn't believe it. And actually, many people said, well, we like the idea, but we just don't think it will be done. Or we like the idea, but could you do it somewhere else? But we're actually doing what we said we would do. But it has taken time. It doesn't happen overnight. We've been years delivering this. I have the scars, but we've always been willing to go into the parish hall. We've always been willing to engage with the community. And I knew we'd done something right when the person who was running the campaign against it said he really liked the plan, he just wanted it somewhere else because it was near where he lived. Well, if you've got to that stage, I think, of course, you'll never say, people, not everyone will be positive about it. Some people will be adversely impacted. But if people see what you're doing is good, then to me, that's as good a success. And I want to be able to take people to walk around. My children, I would like to be able to take them to this community that's very near where we live. One day, not too far in the future. The youngest one's 8, so it's a little way in the future. But actually, I'd like to be walking around that saying, I helped plan this, and maybe he's looking for his first home and saying, I'd like to live here because it's such a great place to live. And that's really what I'm trying to achieve.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lord Taylor. We've got a few more questions, so hopefully we'll be able to answer those towards the end of the session. The examples that you have cited were predominantly smaller developments of 1,000 to 4,000 homes. Because of the cost of land in the southeast, does it mean that these developments will actually need to be between 10,000 and 20,000 homes? For example, Graiseley, which is a local garden community in Shapley Heath, for them to be viable and to cover the costs of putting forward new facilities and infrastructure?
No. So my proposals were always originally conceived around smaller communities, and there's a reason for that. One is that actually the infrastructure costs are lower. You happen to be looking at a site that's already on a railway, but there are as you scale up, the infrastructure costs tend to get higher and be more dependent on government investment. That's not to say that government investment's impossible, but the smaller scales tend to be able to deliver with much less difficulty in terms of infrastructure. And broadly speaking, I tend to talk in the following terms. I talk about 1,500 and up will support a primary school, and a primary school with a good range of local facilities, so what you might call neighbourhood shops and stores and cafes. If you can take it to 4,500 plus, then you can also deliver a scale which is a secondary school, and as the development progresses, you'll be able to deliver other facilities. You'll probably have quite a well-sized supermarket eventually, although again it's important that that's planned in as part of the centre and not as a kind of ring-fenced out-of-town superstore that sucks all the lifeblood out of the community. But you'll be able to deliver a strong range of facilities, and the Nansedon example I gave down here is planned to be 4,500, and it will have all of that, and a very significant high street. And if anyone gets the opportunity to have a look or kick around Poundbury, or indeed is down in Cornwall and wants to go and have a look at Nansedon, you'll see how that works, and you'll see the extraordinary scale of retail that there is. But it's not extraordinary when you look at historic communities. If you get up to about 10,000, then you can start to think about tertiary education as well. There may be 2 secondary schools, and obviously a bigger range of facilities, and a series of quite strong neighbourhoods. It shouldn't just be one, but there'll be certainly one major district. Once you get up to 20,000, you're talking an enormously long period of time. And one of the big problems with these very large settlements, the kind of things that the new towns were doing in the past, is that you have to put in a lot of the infrastructure to support a big place early on before you've got the numbers. So your investment tends to be earlier. It doesn't mean it's undoable, but I think the best way of thinking of it is, although these places will grow faster than historic communities did, it will be many, many years before somewhere will be at 20 or 30,000 homes. Even if you took Milton Keynes, it never delivered more than 1,200 homes in a year, just to give a sense of time. And that was in an era of moving people out of London en masse, moving factories. Those new towns were associated with brand new steelworks, Corby, for example. So it was a very different era, where you were effectively directing movement of people as well, let alone business. And then the last point I'd make, a community of the scale that I think that you've been looking at is also one that is, Milton Keynes people were moving there from a very wide area. Some of it was basically people coming out of London. Today, 8 out of 10 people move within 10 miles of where they already live. So although it's often said, oh, these will be people moving in from elsewhere, above all, what they actually are is the sons and daughters of people who already live in the community, but aren't moving out of their homes. So it's where the next generation, the generation who are already alive. We're not talking about people who are yet to be born. We're talking about people who are in school today, in nurseries today. Where are they going to live, given that my generation are living longer? I'm not planning to not be living in a house when my sons need somewhere to live. I hope that I'll be fit and healthy and still living. So they're going to be looking for a home, and those are the homes that we need to build. But as I say, 8 out of 10 people move within 10 miles of where they already live. And this scale of community is really to meet those kind of needs.